The battlefield fell silent as the last enemy crumpled to the frozen earth. Theron Ashford stood alone among the dead, his breath forming clouds of white mist in the bitter cold. 47 bodies lay scattered across the snow, their blood turning the pristine white into patterns of crimson and shadow. His sword, still warm with the heat of combat, dripped slowly onto the ground beneath his boots. The blade had been forged 3 centuries ago by the master smiths of the Ashford dynasty, and in all that time it had never failed him. 300 years of war, 300 years of death, and still not a single wound marked his flesh. The immortal king lifted his face toward the winter sky, where the moon hung full and brilliant against the darkness. Its silver light washed over the carnage at his feet, turning the fallen warriors into sculptures of ice and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled in recognition of their alpha. Their voices echoed across the mountains like a funeral song for the fallen, a tribute to the dead, and a warning to those who might follow. He should have felt something. Victory, perhaps. Relief that another threat to his kingdom had been eliminated. Pride in the strength that had carried him through 3 centuries of conflict. Any king would have celebrated such a decisive triumph over the raiders who had dared to violate his borders. But Theron felt only the familiar emptiness that had become his constant companion, the hollow ache that no amount of blood or glory could fill. He had grown accustomed to this void over the long decades, this sense of existing without truly living. His heart beat, his lungs drew breath, his body healed from wounds that would have killed any mortal man. Yet something essential had been missing for so long that he had nearly forgotten what it felt like to be whole. His men would arrive soon. They would find their king standing alone among his kills, untouched and unbroken, and they would whisper among themselves about the monster who ruled them. They called him the Deathless King, the wolf who cannot die, the shadow of the mountains. They respected him, they feared him, but none of them truly knew him. None of them understood that the true monster was not the one who killed without mercy. The true monster was the loneliness that consumed him from within, the curse that counted down the days until his soul would be forfeit. Then the wind shifted. Theron's nostrils flared as a scent unlike anything he had encountered in 300 years washed over him. Moonflowers and honey, fresh snow and something ancient, something that stirred the beast within his chest from its centuries of slumber. The fragrance was delicate, yet overwhelming, subtle yet impossible to ignore. It called to something primal in his blood, something that had been dormant for so long he had nearly forgotten its existence. His wolf, sleeping for so long he had nearly forgotten its presence, suddenly roared to life. The sensation was so violent, so unexpected, that Theron staggered. His hand went to his chest as his heart began pounding with a rhythm it had not known since the night he was cursed. Every nerve in his body ignited with electricity. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to hunt, to find the source of that impossible fragrance. His wolf howled within him, a sound of desperate joy that echoed through his very soul. Mate. The word thundered through his consciousness like a war drum. After 300 years of waiting, of refusing political marriages and empty bonds, of choosing solitude over false connection, the impossible had finally happened. The moon goddess had answered prayers he had long since stopped believing in. His true mate was somewhere in the darkness, and she was close. Theron moved before conscious thought could catch up with instinct. He abandoned the battlefield without a backward glance, his powerful legs carrying him across the snow at inhuman speed. The scent grew stronger with each stride, pulling him toward the eastern cliffs where the mountains dropped into treacherous ravines. Any mortal would have fallen a dozen times on the icy terrain, but Theron's feet found purchase where none existed, his supernatural grace carrying him over obstacles that would have stopped armies. The moon guided his path, casting silver light across the winter landscape. He had watched generation after generation of his people find their mates, start their families, grow old together while he remained unchanged. He had attended countless weddings and funerals, watched children become grandparents while he stayed forever frozen at the prime of his immortal life. And now finally the waiting was over. He found her at the bottom of a shallow ravine, her body half buried in fresh snow. She was young, barely past her 18th winter, with hair the color of moonlight itself. Pure white blonde locks spread across the snow around her like a halo, almost indistinguishable from the frozen ground that threatened to claim her life. Her skin was pale as alabaster, marked with the distinctive features of one born without color. An albino, a creature considered cursed by the ignorant masses who feared what they could not understand. But Theron saw no curse when he looked upon her. He saw only the most beautiful thing he had encountered in 3 centuries of existence. Her features were delicate, almost ethereal, as though she had been crafted from moonbeams and winter frost. Even unconscious, even half-frozen, she radiated something that made his breath catch in his throat. She was perfect. Her eyes fluttered open as he approached, and he found himself staring into irises of the palest violet. They were the color of twilight, of lavender blooms in summer fields, of the last light before darkness claimed the sky. Fear flickered across her delicate features as she registered his massive form looming above her. She tried to scramble backward, but her frozen limbs refused to cooperate, her body too weak from cold and exhaustion to obey her panicked commands. "Do not be afraid." The words came out rougher than he intended, his voice hoarse from disuse. Theron Ashford, the Alpha King of the Ashford dynasty, rarely spoke to anyone. He commanded with gestures and enforced with strength. Words were unnecessary when your reputation preceded you across 5 kingdoms. When men trembled at the mere mention of your name, elaborate speeches became redundant. But this girl, this impossible creature who smelled of destiny and belonging, deserved gentleness. She deserved everything he had denied himself for 300 years. "I will not harm you." He knelt beside her slowly, making himself as small as a man of his stature could manage. Up close, he could see the bruises on her wrists, dark marks that spoke of cruel bindings. He could see the torn fabric of her simple dress, inadequate against the mountain cold. He could see the way she trembled, not just from cold, but from terror, from experiences that had taught her to expect violence from those stronger than herself. Someone had hurt her. Someone had driven her to flee into the frozen wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back. Someone had made death seem preferable to whatever fate awaited her. His wolf growled at the thought, a low, dangerous sound that promised retribution. "Please." Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked from cold and exhaustion. Her violet eyes pleaded with him, not for rescue, but for something far darker. "Please just let me die. I cannot go back. I would rather die than go back." The words struck him like a physical blow. This exquisite creature, this gift from the moon goddess herself, wanted to die rather than return to wherever she had come from. What horrors had she endured to make death in the frozen wilderness seem preferable to life? What cruelties had been inflicted upon her to break her spirit so completely? Theron reached out slowly, giving her time to see his movements, and pressed his palm against her frozen cheek. Heat flowed from his touch, the supernatural warmth of an alpha wolf flooding into her chilled flesh. Her eyes widened as color began returning to her blue-tinged lips. The ice crystals in her eyelashes melted from the warmth radiating from his skin. "I am not here to send you back anywhere." His voice softened, becoming something he had not been in centuries. Gentle, tender, human. "I am here because the moon goddess led me to you, because you are meant to be mine, and I am meant to be yours, and I swear on my immortal soul that no harm will ever come to you again." She stared at him with those haunting violet eyes, searching his face for deception, and finding none. He could see her processing his words, weighing them against a lifetime of broken promises and cruel treatment. He could see the battle between hope and fear playing out across her delicate features. Then her strength finally gave out and she collapsed into his arms. Theron lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. Her head fell against his chest, and even unconscious, her body seemed to recognize him. She curled into his warmth with a sigh that spoke of coming home, her frozen fingers clutching weakly at his cloak as though afraid he might disappear. The Alpha King of the Ashford dynasty, the immortal warrior who had slaughtered thousands, held his mate against his heart and began the long walk back to his castle. His wolf purred with contentment, a sensation so foreign after centuries of silence that it made his eyes sting with emotions he had forgotten how to name. He did not look back at the battlefield. He did not need to. Everything that mattered was finally in his arms. The Ashford stronghold rose from the mountains like a monument to power itself. Black stone towers pierced the sky, their silhouettes stark against the perpetual winter that surrounded them. The fortress had been built by Theron's ancestors 1,000 years ago, carved from the very mountains it stood upon. Its walls were 40 feet thick, reinforced with magic that had been lost to the ages. Its gates were made of iron and silver, blessed by priests of the moon goddess to repel any darkness that might seek entry. For 300 years, this fortress had stood unconquered, its walls soaked in the blood of those foolish enough to challenge its master. Armies had broken against its defenses. Assassins had died in its corridors. Even the combined forces of 3 kingdoms had failed to breach its outer walls during the Great War of the 2nd century. But as Theron carried the unconscious girl through the iron gates, the castle felt different, warmer somehow despite the frigid air, as though the very stones recognized that something had changed, as though the fortress itself was welcoming its future queen. General Aldrich met him in the Great Hall. The old warrior was 70 years of age, his hair gone silver, and his face carved with the lines of a lifetime spent in service. He had been Theron's teacher when the Alpha King was still a young prince, uncertain of his power and terrified of his destiny. He had been Theron's advisor through centuries of war and solitude. He had been the steady presence that kept Theron grounded when the curse threatened to drive him mad. More than mentor, more than friend, Aldrich was the closest thing to a father that Theron had ever known. His own sire had died in battle when Theron was barely 20, leaving him to navigate the treacherous waters of kingship alone. Without Aldrich's guidance, without his wisdom and patience and unwavering loyalty, Theron might have become the monster his enemies accused him of being long ago. The general's eyes widened as he saw what his king carried. His weathered face went pale, and for a moment he looked every one of his 70 years. By the goddess. Aldrich's voice was hushed with reverence. Your Majesty, is she? She is. 2 words that changed everything. Theron continued walking toward the east wing, where the finest chambers had stood empty for 300 years. He had ordered them maintained, cleaned weekly, and stocked with fresh linens, even though he had no logical reason to believe they would ever be used. Hope, perhaps, or stubbornness, or simply the refusal to accept that he might spend eternity alone. Aldrich fell into step beside him, his aging body moving with the discipline of decades of training. Even at 70, the general moved with a warrior's grace, his steps silent on the stone floors. Where did you find her? At the bottom of the eastern ravine, half frozen, beaten, begging me to let her die rather than send her back to wherever she came from. The general's jaw tightened. His hand moved to the sword at his hip, an instinctive gesture of violence from a man who had spent his life protecting those who could not protect themselves. Someone will answer for that. Yes. Theron's voice held the promise of violence. Someone will. They reached the chambers, and Theron laid his mate carefully on the massive bed that dominated the room. The sheets were silk, imported from the southern kingdoms at enormous expense. The furs were the finest quality, taken from the greatest hunts of 100 years. The furniture was carved from dark wood that had been old when his grandfather was young. Everything in this room had been prepared for a woman he had never met but always believed would come. She stirred as the warmth of the room began thawing her frozen limbs. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding their violet depths, before memory returned and fear followed. She pushed herself away from him, pressing her back against the headboard as though expecting a blow. Easy. Theron sat on the edge of the bed, keeping distance between them, but staying close enough to reassure her. You are safe. This is my home, and no one can hurt you here. She pushed herself up on trembling arms, her gaze darting around the luxurious chamber before settling on him. In the firelight, she could finally see him clearly, the sharp planes of his face, weathered by centuries but still handsome, the copper eyes that burned with intensity, the massive frame that spoke of power barely contained. He was twice her size, easily, with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway and hands large enough to crush stone. Yet despite his obvious strength, there was something in his expression that made her hesitate. Something almost vulnerable beneath the predatory exterior. Who are you? Her voice was stronger now, though still wary. My name is Theron Ashford. I am the Alpha King of the Ashford dynasty, ruler of these mountains and all who dwell within them. He watched her process this information, watched the fear in her eyes shift to something else. Not hope exactly, but the absence of complete despair. She had heard of him, clearly. Everyone in the 5 kingdoms had heard of the Deathless King, but the stories she had been told were clearly different from the reality before her. "And who are you, little one? What is the name of the woman the moon goddess has chosen to be my mate?" She was silent for a long moment. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, she answered, "Isolde, my name is Isolde. Isolde." He tasted the name on his tongue and found it beautiful, perfect for the creature before him, a name that spoke of solitude and strength, of beauty that thrived in isolation. "Tell me, Isolde, tell me what drove you to flee into the mountains to die." The story came slowly, pulled from her like poison from a wound. Each word seemed to cost her something, as though speaking her history aloud made it more real, more painful. She was the youngest child of a minor noble house, born with the white hair and pale skin that her family considered a curse. They had hidden her away for 18 years, locked in a tower room, fed scraps, and treated as an embarrassment to be concealed from the world. Her own mother refused to look at her. Her father pretended she did not exist. Her siblings had never spoken a kind word to her in all her years of life. But even in her prison, she had found small rebellions. A sympathetic servant had taught her to read in secret, smuggling books into her tower room by hiding them beneath laundry baskets. An elderly guardsman had shown her the basics of self-defense, horrified by how helpless she was. These small acts of kindness had kept her sane through 18 years of cruelty. Then, a month ago, everything changed. A powerful lord from a distant kingdom had offered a fortune for her hand in marriage. Not because he loved her, but because he believed her unusual appearance carried magical properties. He wanted to own her like a rare artifact, to add her to his collection of curiosities and anomalies. Her family had agreed without hesitation. After 18 years of treating her as a burden, they had finally found a use for their cursed daughter. Isolde had overheard the servants discussing the arrangement. She would be shipped to this lord within the fortnight, traded like livestock for gold and political favor. And from what she had heard of this lord, death was preferable to life as his possession. So she ran. She stole a servant's cloak and fled in the night, heading for the mountains where no one would follow. She had no plan beyond escape, no hope beyond a quick death in the frozen wilderness. Better to die free than to live as a trophy in some cruel lord's collection. Then Theron had found her. "This lord who sought to purchase you." Theron's voice was deceptively calm, but his copper eyes had darkened to something approaching black. "What is his name?" Isolde hesitated, then whispered a name that made the Alpha King's blood run cold. "Lord Varon. Lord Varon of the Shadowhold." The room seemed to darken at the name. The fire in the hearth flickered as though touched by an invisible wind. Theron's hands clenched into fists, his claws extending slightly before he forced control over himself. Of all the beings in the 5 kingdoms, of all the enemies he had faced across 3 centuries, it had to be Varon. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Aldrich, standing silently by the door, stepped forward. His weathered face had gone pale at the name. "Your Majesty, leave us." The command was sharp, final, and double the guards on every entrance. "No one enters or leaves without my personal approval." The general bowed and departed, his face grave. He knew what that name meant to his king. He knew the history that connected Theron Ashford and Lord Varon. He knew that of all the names she could have spoken, that one was the worst possible answer. When they were alone, Theron turned back to Isolde. She was watching him with those impossible violet eyes, trying to read his expression and failing. "You know him." It was not a question. "Yes." Theron's voice was heavy with hatred. "I know him. He was my brother once, my closest friend, and then he became my greatest enemy." She waited for him to continue, but Theron shook his head. That story could wait. The full weight of his history with Varon would only frighten her further, and she had been frightened enough for one lifetime. There were more immediate matters to address. "You spoke of the mate bond." Isolde pulled the furs around herself, her gaze dropping to her lap. Even discussing such things with a man she had just met clearly made her uncomfortable, despite the supernatural connection between them. "You said the moon goddess led you to me, that I am meant to be yours." "I did." "What does that mean?" Theron leaned forward, ensuring she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "It means that somewhere in the heavens, the goddess who created our kind looked upon my soul and looked upon yours and declared them to be 2 halves of a single whole. It means that I have waited 300 years for you, Isolde. 300 years of refusing every political marriage, every strategic alliance, every woman who was not you." His voice softened. "It means that you have a choice. You can accept the bond, and we will perform the sacred binding ceremony that will connect our souls for eternity. Or you can refuse, and I will give you gold, protection, and safe passage to anywhere in the 5 kingdoms you wish to go." Isolde's eyes widened. "You would let me leave? I would never force you to stay. Even though I am your fated mate?" "Even so." Theron reached out slowly and took her small hand in his massive palm. Her fingers were still cold, but warming quickly from his touch. "I have learned that a bond forced is no bond at all. You must choose this. Choose me, or the connection between us will be nothing but chains." She stared at their joined hands for a long moment, his tanned skin against her pale flesh, his strength encompassing her fragility. The contrast should have frightened her. Instead, it felt strangely right. "I need time." "Take all the time you need." He stood, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, if you feel strong enough, I will show you my kingdom. You will see who I am, what I have built, what I am offering you. And at the end of 7 days, you will give me your answer." 7 days? 7 days. Theron moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. "Everything in this room is yours. The servants will bring you food and clothes and anything else you require. And Isolde?" She looked up at him. "No matter what you decide, you will never go back to your family. You will never be sold to Varen or anyone else. That I swear to you on my immortal blood." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the chamber that was meant to be hers. Isolde sat in the silence for a long time, staring at the door through which the Alpha King had departed. Her mind struggled to process everything that had happened in the span of a single night. She had left her father's house expecting to die. Instead, she had found herself in the bed of a king who looked at her as though she was precious. A king who gave her choices when no one ever had before. She lay back against the silk pillows and closed her eyes, her exhausted body finally surrendering to sleep. And for the first time in 18 years, she slept without nightmares. The week that followed changed everything Isolde had ever believed about the world and her place in it. Each morning, Theron came to her chambers and offered his arm. Each morning she took it, and he led her deeper into his kingdom. She met the servants who bowed with genuine respect, not the forced courtesy of her father's household. She met the soldiers who spoke of their king with admiration bordering on worship. She met the common folk who lived within the castle walls, protected and prosperous under Theron's rule. On the second day, he took her to the great library, where thousands of books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Ancient tomes bound in leather sat beside illuminated manuscripts that had taken monks decades to complete. The scent of old paper and candle wax filled the air, and dust motes danced in the light streaming through high windows. He watched her eyes light up at the sight and smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his harsh features into something almost handsome. "You love to read. I taught myself in secret. Books were my only escape from the tower. Then every book in this library is yours. Read what you wish, when you wish. Knowledge should never be locked away." General Aldrich joined them on the 3rd day, and Isolde discovered the depth of the bond between mentor and king. She watched Theron defer to the old warrior's counsel, saw the genuine affection in their interactions, understood that this immortal ruler valued wisdom over submission. They moved through the castle together, the king and his general, and Isolde saw the respect in the eyes of everyone they passed. "He listens to you," she observed to Aldrich as Theron walked ahead, speaking with a group of soldiers about patrol rotations. "He trusts your judgment." Aldrich smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "I have known His Majesty since he was a boy of 15, still learning to control his wolf. I watched him struggle with powers that could have destroyed him. I watched him make mistakes and learn from them. I watched him grow from an uncertain prince into the greatest king these mountains have ever seen. He is more than my sovereign, my lady. He is the son I never had." "And what kind of man is he, truly?" The general considered the question with the gravity it deserved. He walked in silence for several paces, his gaze distant with memory. "He is a man who has endured centuries of solitude without losing his honor. He has never broken his word once given. He has never harmed an innocent, though the temptation must have been immense. He could have taken any woman he wanted, forced any bond he desired, and none would have been able to stop him." Aldrich turned to look directly at Isolde. Instead, he waited. That is the kind of man Theron Ashford is. On the 4th day, she discovered the orphanage that Theron funded within the castle walls. 30 children who had lost their parents to war or sickness, given food and shelter and education at the king's personal expense. She watched him kneel to speak with a small boy who had lost both legs to frostbite, treating the child with the same respect he showed his generals. He did not offer pity or empty comfort. He offered practical help and genuine interest in the boy's progress with his studies. "Why do you do this?" she asked later when they were alone. "Because someone must." His voice was matter-of-fact. Power means nothing if it is not used to protect those who cannot protect themselves. These children lost everything through no fault of their own. The least I can do is give them a chance at a better future. On the 5th day, Theron took her to the training grounds. She sat beside General Aldrich while the Alpha King sparred with his warriors, demonstrating the skill that had kept him alive through centuries of conflict. His movements were beautiful in their brutality, precise in their lethality. Isolde watched, transfixed, as he disarmed opponent after opponent without ever drawing blood. "He is holding back," Aldrich murmured. "If he fought at full strength, he would kill them all in heartbeats. Instead, he teaches. He shapes them into better warriors while reminding them that their king stands with them, not above them." "Why does he fight at all? He is the king. He could command from safety." The general shook his head. "That is not the Ashford way. Our kings have always led from the front. They share the danger with their men because they believe no soldier should face a death their king would not face himself." His code of honor. Yes, Aldrich's voice carried a deep respect. "It would be easier to be ruthless. It would be easier to rule through fear alone. But Theron believes that a king who cannot earn his people's respect does not deserve their obedience." After training, Theron joined them, his body slicked with sweat from exertion. He dropped onto the bench beside Isolde, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "What do you think?" His copper eyes met hers. "Of my warriors? I think they would die for you, and I for them." He said it simply, without pride or boasting. "Every man on that field has sworn his life to my service. That oath goes both ways. Their lives are precious to me. Their families are under my protection. If I ask them to march into battle, I must be willing to march beside them." Isolde studied his profile, seeing depths she had not expected in a man called Monster by half the realm. "You are not what I imagined an Alpha King would be." "What did you imagine?" "Cruelty, arrogance, a beast wearing the skin of a man." Theron's lips curved into something that was almost a smile. "Give it time. You have not seen me in battle yet." But she had seen enough. By the 6th day, Isolde knew what her answer would be. On the 7th day, she went to Theron. She found him in his private study, standing before a window that overlooked his kingdom. The sunset painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold, casting long shadows across the mountains. He turned as she entered, and something flickered in his copper eyes. Hope, perhaps, or fear. The great Alpha King, who had never shown weakness to anyone, could not hide his vulnerability from the woman fated to be his mate. "You have made your decision." His voice was carefully neutral. "I have." Isolde crossed the room to stand before him, her heart pounding against her ribs. "For 18 years, I was told I was worthless, cursed, an embarrassment to be hidden away and eventually sold. I believed them. I believed I deserved nothing better than the scraps they gave me." She reached up and placed her hand against his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath her palm. "Then you found me in the snow. You carried me to safety. You gave me warmth and protection and something I had never experienced before. Choice. You gave me the power to decide my own fate." Theron covered her hand with his own, his massive palm engulfing her delicate fingers. "And what have you decided?" "I did not choose you because of the mate bond." Isolde's voice was steady, certain. "I did not choose you because the moon goddess declared us destined. I chose you because you are the first person to ever let me choose at all. I chose you because you showed me kindness when you owed me nothing. I chose you because in 7 days you have treated me with more respect than my family showed me in 18 years. She rose on her toes, bringing her face closer to his. "I choose you, Theron Ashford, not because I have to, because I want to." The Alpha King made a sound low in his throat, something between a growl and a groan. His control, so carefully maintained through 7 days of proximity, finally cracked. He pulled her against his chest and buried his face in her moonlight hair, breathing in the scent that had haunted him since the moment he caught it on the wind. "My mate." His voice was rough with emotion. "My Isolde." They stood there in the dying light of sunset, two souls who had been lost finally finding where they belonged. The binding ceremony took place 3 nights later, on the full moon. The great hall of the Ashford stronghold had been transformed. 1,000 candles filled the space with warm, flickering light. Fresh snowflowers imported from the northern reaches perfumed the air with their delicate fragrance. Silk banners in the Ashford colors hung from the rafters. The entire household had gathered to witness their king finally claim his mate. Isolde stood at one end of the hall, dressed in a gown of silver silk that made her look like a goddess descended from the heavens. Her white blonde hair had been woven with small diamonds that caught the candlelight like stars. Theron waited at the other end, resplendent in ceremonial black, his copper eyes never leaving her face. General Aldrich presided over the ceremony, his voice carrying the ancient words that had bound Ashford kings to their mates for generations. The words spoke of unity and protection, of souls intertwined and fates bound together. They spoke of love that transcended death and duty that would never falter. The vows were exchanged, the sacred promises made, and when Theron finally placed the ceremonial collar around Isolde's throat, a symbol of protection and belonging, something shifted in the air around them. Magic stirred. Isolde felt it first, a warmth building in her chest, spreading through her veins like liquid sunlight. Her skin began to glow with a faint silver luminescence that made the gathered crowd gasp. The light intensified, flowing from her body toward Theron, wrapping around him in tendrils of pure radiance. Where the light touched him, old scars began to fade, wounds that had marked his flesh for centuries, souvenirs of battles that should have killed him, smoothed away as though they had never existed. Theron stared at his arms, at his chest, at skin that had not been unmarked since his youth. Aldrich stepped back, his weathered face pale with shock. "By the goddess," his whisper cut through the stunned silence. "She is moonborn." The word rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped into still water. Moonborn. The last descendant of the moon goddess herself, a bloodline thought extinct for 500 years, a power that had not walked the earth since the old gods faded into legend. Isolde looked at her own hands, at the silver glow that pulsed beneath her pale skin. "What is happening to me?" Theron pulled her into his arms, shielding her from the staring eyes of the crowd. "Later." His voice was calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "We will discuss this later. For now, the ceremony is complete." He swept her from the hall, carrying her through corridors she had grown familiar with over the past week. The silver glow was fading from her skin, retreating back to wherever it had come from, but Isolde could still feel it, a power sleeping within her that she had never known existed. Theron brought her to their chambers and laid her gently on the bed. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his copper eyes filled with emotions she could not name. "You are more than I ever dared hope for." His voice was reverent. "Moonborn, the chosen of the goddess herself. No wonder Varen wanted you. No wonder the bond between us burned so bright." "I do not understand." Isolde reached for him, needing his strength. "I do not know what any of this means." "It means you carry power within you, my mate. Power that has not existed in this world for 5 centuries. In the hands of someone like Varen, that power would be a weapon of destruction. He would drain you, use you, consume you until nothing remained but an empty shell. And in your hands?" Theron lowered himself beside her, pulling her against his chest. "In my hands it is a gift, a miracle, the promise of everything I have been waiting for." They lay in silence for a time, processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. But there was more. Isolde could sense it in the tension that still coiled through Theron's body, in the way his heart refused to slow despite the calmness of his voice. "There is something else." She pushed herself up to look at him. "Something you have not told me." Theron closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were filled with a pain that transcended centuries. "You asked once why I know Lord Varen, why I called him my brother and my enemy in the same breath." "Yes. 300 years ago, Varen and I were as close as 2 beings could be without sharing blood. We trained together, fought together, swore oaths to protect one another until death and beyond. I trusted him with my life. I would have died for him without a moment's hesitation." "What happened?" "We both fell in love with the same woman." The words hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. "Her name was Alara. She was a warrior, fierce and beautiful, and we both wanted her. But she chose me." Varen pretended to accept her decision. He stood beside me at our betrothal feast and raised a toast to our happiness. Theron's voice grew hollow. "That night, he murdered her, cut her throat while she slept and fled before anyone could stop him. He left me a message written in her blood. If I could not have her, neither will you." Isolde pressed her hand to her mouth in horror. "And the curse?" When I tracked him down, when I finally caught him and was ready to take my vengeance, he performed dark magic. Ancient, terrible magic that bound my fate to an impossible choice. Theron sat up, his massive frame casting shadows across the bed. Find my true mate within 300 years and complete a genuine binding, or the beast within me will consume my mind. I will become a monster in truth, driven to slaughter until I have killed 1,000 innocent souls to fuel my continued existence. 300 years. Isolde's voice was barely audible. How long do you have left? 3 months. The weight of those 2 words pressed down on her like a physical force. You found me just in time. Theron turned to face her, and she saw the desperation he had hidden so well. You are not just my mate, Isolde. You are my salvation. Without you, I would have become the very monster my enemies always claimed I was. Without you, everything I have built, everyone I have protected, would have drowned in blood. He took her hands in his grip almost painful. I need you to understand something. I did not choose you because of the curse. I would have searched until my last breath for my true mate. But the goddess was merciful. She sent you to me in my darkest hour. Isolde looked at the man before her, the immortal king who had shown her more kindness in a week than she had known in a lifetime. The warrior who fought beside his men and kept his word even when it cost him. The lonely soul who had endured centuries of solitude rather than accept anything less than genuine love. Then we face this together. She placed her palm against his cheek. Whatever comes, whatever Veron tries, we face it together. Theron leaned into her touch, a shudder running through his powerful frame. Together. The word was a vow, a promise, a declaration that echoed through the bond now connecting their souls. Their bond was sealed, their fates intertwined. But even as they held each other in the darkness, even as they allowed themselves this moment of peace, the wheels of destiny were already turning. 2 weeks after the binding, a messenger arrived at the Ashford stronghold. He bore news that would shatter any illusion of safety they might have harbored. Isolde's brother, Garrett, had raised an army. 3 kingdoms had joined his cause, convinced by Lord Veron's gold and lies that the Alpha King had abducted an innocent girl. 50,000 soldiers were marching toward the mountains. War was coming. Aldrich brought the news to Theron in his study, where the king sat reviewing defense plans he had hoped would never be needed. They will be at our borders within the month. The general's voice was grave. Veron has convinced them that you took the girl by force. He claims to be her righteous savior. Theron's jaw tightened. He wants her for himself. He always did. The curse was just the beginning of his obsession. What are your orders, Your Majesty? The Alpha King stood, moving to the window that overlooked his kingdom. His mate was somewhere in the gardens below, learning the names of flowers from an elderly servant who had taken a liking to her. Even from this distance, he could feel her presence through their bond, a warmth that had become essential to his existence. He would burn the world before he let Veron touch her. Double the patrols, reinforce the mountain passes, send word to our allies that we may need to call upon old debts. Theron turned to face his oldest friend. And Aldrich, Your Majesty? Begin preparing for siege. One way or another, blood will be spilled before this is over. The general bowed and departed to carry out his orders. Alone in his study, Theron allowed himself a moment of raw emotion. Fear for Isolde, rage at Veron, grief for the peace that had been stolen from him so soon after he had finally found it. He had waited so long for his mate, and now, just weeks after finding her, he might have to watch the world burn to keep her. In the gardens below, Isolde paused in her study of winter roses. She felt a pulse through the bond, a flash of darkness that made her heart clench. Something was wrong. Something was coming. She turned toward the castle, toward the window where she somehow knew Theron stood watching. Whatever comes, she whispered to herself, repeating the promise she had made on their wedding night. We face it together. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the mountains, Lord Veron smiled as his spies brought word of the binding ceremony. The Moonborn had revealed herself. The curse was nearing its deadline, and the game that had begun 300 years ago was finally approaching its end game. War was coming to the mountains of the Ashford dynasty, and only the moon goddess herself knew how it would end. 1 month had passed since the binding ceremony, and Isolde was no longer the frightened girl who had begged for death in the snow. She stood before the mirror in their chambers, studying the changes that had transformed her body and soul. Her white blonde hair now carried threads of silver that sparkled like starlight, woven through her locks as though the moon itself had touched her. Her pale skin held a faint luminescence that became visible in darkness, a soft glow that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, and her eyes, once the pale violet of twilight, now burned with flecks of silver that caught the light like diamonds. The moonborn power was awakening within her, stretching after centuries of dormancy, learning the shape of its new vessel. Behind her, reflected in the glass, Theron watched from the bed. His copper eyes tracked her movements with an intensity that still made her breath catch, even after weeks of sharing his chambers. The mate bond between them had deepened beyond anything either had expected, becoming a constant presence that connected their souls across any distance. She could feel his emotions as clearly as her own, his pride in her transformation, his fear of what was coming, his love, fierce and consuming, that burned through the bond like fire. "You are staring." She did not turn from the mirror. "I am admiring." His voice was rough with sleep and something deeper. "There is a difference." Isolde smiled despite the weight pressing against her heart. In 1 month, she had learned to read him as easily as the books in his library. She knew when he was hiding his worry behind casual words. She knew when the curse pulled at his soul, reminding him of the deadline that grew closer with each passing day. She knew when he needed her touch to anchor him to the present. She turned and crossed to the bed, lowering herself beside him. His arms wrapped around her immediately, pulling her against the solid warmth of his chest. "What troubles you this morning?" His question was quiet, private. "The same thing that troubled you last night, and the night before." Theron sighed, his breath stirring her hair. "The armies." "Yes, the armies." For 3 weeks, scouts had been tracking the coalition's march toward the Ashford Mountains. 50,000 soldiers from 3 kingdoms, united under the banner of her brother Garrett's righteous crusade. Lord Varen's gold had purchased their loyalty. His lies had purchased their conviction. They believed they were coming to rescue an innocent girl from a monster's clutches. They had no idea that the monster they sought to slay was the only thing standing between the 5 kingdoms and the true darkness that lurked in the shadows. "Aldrich says they will reach the outer passes within 2 weeks. Theron's voice held the weight of command, of a king who had spent 3 centuries defending his realm. "We have the advantage of terrain. The mountains have broken larger armies than this. But never an army led by Varen's cunning." Isolde pushed herself up to look at him. "He knows these mountains almost as well as you do. He trained here, fought here. He knows every pass, every weakness, every strategy you might employ. Which is why I have been developing new strategies." Theron sat up, the blankets falling away to reveal the muscled planes of his chest. "And why I need you to help me." "Me? You are moonborn, my mate. Your power could change everything if we learn to harness it. But more than that, you see things I cannot. You think in ways I have never learned. In 1 month, you have become my greatest advisor." The weight of his faith pressed against her shoulders like a physical force. 1 month ago, she had been a prisoner in her father's tower, worthless and forgotten. Now an immortal king looked to her for counsel in matters of war and survival. "Then we should begin." She rose from the bed with a determination that surprised even herself. "Show me your strategies, show me your defenses, and I will show you what I see." The war room occupied the heart of the Ashford stronghold, a vast chamber where maps covered every wall and a massive table dominated the center of the floor. Carved from a single piece of mountain oak, the table displayed a detailed model of the kingdom and its surrounding territories. Small figures represented troop positions, supply lines, defensive emplacements. General Aldrich was already there when they arrived, bent over the northern section of the map with 2 younger commanders. He straightened as his king entered, offering a formal bow that belied the warmth in his eyes. "Your Majesty, my queen." The title still felt strange on Isolde's ears, but she was learning to accept it. She was no longer the cursed girl hidden in a tower. She was the queen of the Ashford dynasty, mate to the most powerful alpha in 5 kingdoms. She needed to start acting like it. "Report." Theron moved to the table, his gaze sweeping across the tactical situation. Aldrich's weathered face grew grave. "Our scouts have confirmed the coalition's route. They are taking the Valley of Shadows, just as you predicted. It is the fastest path through the mountains, but also the most dangerous." "Dangerous for them or for us?" "Both." The general gestured to a narrow passage on the map. "The valley provides natural choke points where a smaller force can hold against superior numbers. But it also limits our ability to maneuver. If they break through our primary defensive line, there is nowhere to fall back except the castle itself." Isolde studied the map, her mind racing through possibilities. She had spent 2 weeks in the Great Library, devouring every text on military strategy and historical campaigns she could find. The knowledge was raw, untempered by experience, but it gave her a framework for understanding the situation before her. What about the eastern cliffs? She pointed to a series of ridges that overlooked the valley. Could we position archers there? Aldrich's eyebrows rose. It would require climbers to reach those positions. Dangerous work, even for our best men. But if we could establish an elevated position, we could rain arrows down on their column, while they are trapped in the valley. The general exchanged a glance with Theron, something that looked almost like respect crossing his weathered features. The Queen speaks wisdom, Your Majesty. I had considered the same approach, but dismissed it as too risky. Perhaps it deserves another evaluation. See to it. Theron's voice carried the weight of command. I want options, Aldrich. As many as we can generate. We will not face this threat with a single strategy. The meeting continued for hours, breaking only when the midday meal was served. Isolde found herself drawn deeper into the discussions, offering observations that the seasoned warriors considered with genuine seriousness. By the time evening fell, she had contributed 3 tactical suggestions that were incorporated into the defense plans. As they walked back to their chambers, Theron took her hand in his massive palm. You did well today. I did what was needed. No. He stopped, turning her to face him. You did more than that. You proved that you belong in that room, that you are not just my mate, but my partner in every way that matters. His copper eyes burned with intensity. In all my years, I have never had an equal. Someone who could stand beside me, challenge me, make me see things I had missed. You have given me that in a single month. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, a gentle kiss that carried the weight of everything she felt, but could not put into words. The bond between them hummed with warmth and connection, with the promise of a future they were both determined to protect. Whatever comes, she whispered against his mouth. Together, together. The word had become their prayer, their promise, their battle cry against the darkness gathering on their borders. But even as they held each other in the corridor, neither knew how soon that promise would be tested. 3 days later, Commander Draven arrived at the Ashford stronghold. He came from the northern kingdom of Frostfall, a realm of eternal winter and warriors forged in ice. His official purpose was diplomatic, bearing a message from his king regarding the coalition's advance. His unofficial purpose was far more complex. Isolde recognized the way he looked at her the moment he entered the Great Hall. She had seen that look before, on the faces of men who viewed her as a possession to be claimed rather than a person to be respected. Lord Varen had sent emissaries with that same hungry gaze. Her own family had negotiated with men who wore that expression like a badge of ownership. Commander Draven was different in some ways. He was young for a commander, perhaps 30 winters, with the pale hair and ice-blue eyes common to the northern bloodlines. He moved with the fluid grace of a trained warrior, and the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw spoke of battles survived through skill rather than luck. But the hunger in his eyes was the same. Alpha King. Draven dropped to one knee before the throne, his head bowed in formal respect. I bring greetings from my sovereign, King Aldris of Frostfall. He wishes you to know that while he has not joined the coalition against you, he remains concerned about recent events. Concerned. Theron's voice was flat, revealing nothing. A diplomatic word for sitting on the fence. My king is cautious by nature, Your Majesty. He prefers to understand a situation fully before committing his forces to any cause. Draven rose, his gaze drifting to where Isolde sat beside the throne. He has heard rumors of your new queen, of her unusual nature. He sent me to verify these rumors and report back. And what have you verified so far? That the rumors do not do her justice. There was something in Draven's voice that made Isolde's skin prickle with warning. Not threat exactly, but intensity, interest, the kind of attention that could become dangerous if left unchecked. Theron felt it too. Through their bond, she sensed the flare of possessive anger that rose in his chest. His wolf, always close to the surface when it came to protecting his mate, stirred with a growl that only she could hear. But the Alpha King's expression remained carved from stone. You will stay as our guest for as long as your diplomatic mission requires, Commander. My steward will show you to appropriate chambers. We will speak more at dinner. It was a dismissal, polite but unmistakable. Draven bowed again and followed the steward from the hall, but not before casting one last glance at Isolde that lingered a moment too long. When they were alone, Theron turned to her with thunder in his eyes. He wants you. He wants what I represent. Isolde kept her voice calm, though her heart raced with the echo of his anger through their bond. A moonborn queen would bring considerable power to any kingdom. I suspect his king sent him to evaluate me as a potential alternative over my dead body. The words came out as a growl, barely human. That is precisely what he would need to arrange, yes. She rose from her seat and moved to stand before him, placing her hand on his chest, where his heart hammered against his ribs. But I chose you, Theron. No northern commander, no matter how handsome or powerful, will change that. The bond between us is not a chain that can be broken by a prettier offer. Slowly, the tension drained from his massive frame. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm more firmly against his chest. I know. Forgive me. Centuries of solitude have made me possessive. I have noticed. A smile tugged at her lips, but I find I do not mind it as much as I expected. The training grounds became their sanctuary in the days that followed. Each morning, before the sun fully crested the mountain peaks, Theron taught Isolde the arts of war that every queen needed to understand. Archery, swordsmanship, hand-to-hand combat, strategic thinking. She would never match his strength or centuries of experience, but that was not the point. The point was to give her options, tools she could use if everything else failed, and she found herself alone against enemies who would show no mercy. On the fourth day of training, something remarkable happened. Isolde was practicing with a wooden sword, her movements still clumsy compared to Theron's fluid grace. He pressed her backward across the training yard, his attacks measured but relentless, forcing her to defend against angles she had not anticipated. Then the moonborn power stirred within her. She felt it rise like a wave, flooding her limbs with silver light that only she could see. Time seemed to slow. Theron's movements, usually too fast for her to track, became visible, predictable. She saw the opening in his defense before he created it, saw the path her blade needed to take. Her wooden sword slipped past his guard and pressed against his ribs. They both froze. "Did you see that?" Theron's voice was hushed with wonder. "I saw everything. It was like watching a dance I had already learned the steps to." The moonborn sight. He stepped back, lowering his weapon. Legend says the old moonborn could see moments before they happened. Not prophecy exactly, but intuition so powerful it approached precognition. We thought the ability was lost with the bloodline. It seems it was only sleeping. Isolde looked at her hands, still tingling with the fading echo of power. "Like the rest of my gifts." Theron pulled her into his arms, his pride washing through their bond like sunlight. "You are extraordinary, my mate. Every day you reveal something new, something wonderful." From that moment on, their training sessions took on a new dimension. Theron pushed her harder, testing the limits of her emerging abilities. And slowly, session by session, Isolde transformed from a frightened girl who had never held a weapon into something far more formidable. General Aldrich often joined them, offering corrections and encouragement in equal measure. The old warrior had taken to Isolde with a warmth that surprised everyone, including himself. "She reminds me of someone," Aldrich said one morning, watching Isolde practice her archery across the field. "Who?" Theron asked, though something in his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "Elara." The name fell between them like a stone dropped into still water. Theron's jaw tightened, but he did not look away from where his mate drew her bow. "They are nothing alike. Not in appearance, no, but in spirit? That fire, that determination to be more than what others expect." Aldrich's weathered face softened. "Elara would have approved of her, I think. She would have wanted you to find happiness again." Theron was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotions he rarely allowed himself to show. "I still see her sometimes, in dreams. She is always running toward me, and I can never reach her in time. The dreams will fade." Aldrich placed a hand on his king's shoulder. "Not the love, never that, but the pain. It fades, given enough time and enough reason to live in the present rather than the past." On the field, Isolde released her arrow. It flew true, striking the target dead center with a satisfying thwack. She turned toward them with a smile of triumph, her white hair catching the morning light like a banner of victory. Theron felt the warmth of their bond wash through him, and for the first time in centuries, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps Aldrich was right. Perhaps the past could release its grip on his soul. Perhaps the future could be something other than loneliness and duty and the slow erosion of hope. Perhaps, with her beside him, he could finally learn to live again. Commander Draven observed the training session from a distance, his ice-blue eyes tracking every movement. He had been watching for 3 days now, studying the dynamic between the Alpha King and his moonborn queen. What he saw troubled him. This was no political alliance, no arranged marriage of convenience. The way they moved around each other spoke of something far deeper. The small touches, the shared glances, the way Theron's entire demeanor shifted when Isolde entered his presence. They were genuinely in love. That complicated things considerably. Draven had come to the Ashford stronghold with orders to evaluate the Moonborn as a potential prize. His king wanted options, alternatives to supporting either side in the coming conflict. A Moonborn queen would be a prize beyond measure, worth any cost to acquire. But watching her with Theron, watching the bond that connected them in ways that went beyond the physical, Draven found himself questioning his mission. "Forgive me." The voice came from behind him, startling him from his thoughts. "I did not mean to interrupt your surveillance." Draven turned to find Isolde standing a few feet away, her violet eyes bright with amusement. She had approached without making a sound, a skill that spoke of training he had not expected. "I was not surveilling, merely observing." "Is there a difference?" "In intent, if nothing else." He forced a smile that felt hollow on his lips. "Your archery has improved considerably since I arrived. My husband is an excellent teacher." The emphasis on husband was subtle but unmistakable, a gentle reminder of boundaries that should not be crossed. Draven felt a flush of something that might have been shame heat his cheeks. "I owe you an apology, Your Majesty. My behavior in the throne room was inappropriate. I looked at you as a curiosity rather than a queen. It was disrespectful, and I regret it." Isolde studied him for a long moment, her strange eyes seeming to pierce through his careful facade to the conflicted man beneath. "What did your king send you here to do, Commander?" The directness of this question caught him off guard. To observe, to report, to evaluate the situation before committing to any course of action. "And what have you observed?" "That I was wrong about many things." Draven met her gaze steadily. "I expected to find a monster holding an innocent girl captive. Instead, I found a king who loves his queen and a queen who has chosen her king. Whatever the coalition believes, they are not coming to rescue anyone. They are coming to tear apart something genuine." Isolde's expression softened. "That is a dangerous conclusion for an emissary to reach." "Perhaps, but it is the truth, and I was raised to value truth above convenience." Before Draven could say more, a horn sounded from the castle walls. Its note was urgent, alarming, the signal for immediate assembly in the Great Hall. Something had happened. They reached the hall together, Draven falling into step behind Isolde as she rushed to join Theron. The Alpha King stood before the throne, his face carved from granite, holding a scroll that trembled slightly in his grip. Beside him, General Aldrich looked as though he had aged 10 years in the span of minutes. "What is it?" Isolde moved to her husband's side. "What has happened?" Theron turned to her, and the pain in his copper eyes made her heart clench. "Varen," he handed her the scroll. "He has sent terms." Isolde read the message twice before the words truly registered. Lord Varen was holding 24 Ashford soldiers prisoner, captured during a patrol 3 days ago. Among them was a name that made her blood run cold. Captain Marcus, General Aldrich's grandson. The terms were simple. Surrender the Moonborn to Varen's custody, or watch the prisoners die one by one, starting with the general's only surviving family. He knew. Aldrich's voice was hoarse with barely contained anguish. Varen knew Marcus was on that patrol. This was not random. This was targeted. Of course it was. Theron's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Varen does not do anything randomly. He is trying to divide us, force me to choose between protecting my people and protecting my mate." The hall fell silent as the weight of the situation pressed down on everyone present. Draven watched from the shadows, his heart heavy with the realization of how much darker this conflict had become. "You cannot surrender her." Aldrich spoke the words like they were being torn from his throat. "Even for Marcus, even for my blood. You cannot give Varen what he wants. I would never ask you to make that choice." Isolde's voice cut through the tension, calm and steady despite the terror that clutched at her heart. "But perhaps we do not have to choose at all." She turned to face Theron, her mind racing through the possibilities she had studied in the war room. "Varen expects you to either surrender me or abandon your men. Those are the only options he has given you. But what if we create a third option?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that while Varen is waiting for your response, believing you are paralyzed by an impossible choice, we strike. We rescue the prisoners before he can carry out his threats." The audacity of the suggestion hung in the air. Around the hall, warriors exchanged uncertain glances. It would have to be a small force. Aldrich was thinking tactically now, setting aside his personal anguish to focus on the problem. Too many men and Varen's scouts would spot us coming. We would need to infiltrate his camp, extract the prisoners, and escape before he could respond. I can lead 20 of my best. Theron's voice was firm, fast and silent, in and out before Varen knows we are there. And leave the castle undefended? Leave her unprotected? Aldrich gestured toward Isolde. No, you are too valuable. Send someone else. There is no one else. Theron turned to face his oldest friend. I am the only one who knows Varen's tactics well enough to anticipate his traps. The only one fast enough and strong enough to get our men out alive if things go wrong. It has to be me. The king and his general stared at each other, a lifetime of trust and respect flowing between them. Then let me coordinate from here. Aldrich straightened, his hand moving to the sword at his hip. I will manage the castle defenses and prepare for any retaliation. Marcus is my grandson, but my duty is to this kingdom. I trust you to bring him home. Theron clasped his mentor's shoulder, gratitude and respect passing between them without words. I will not fail you, old friend. Isolde stepped forward, her own plan taking shape. There is another way to help. She looked from Theron to Aldrich and back again. I will respond to Varen's terms. Request a parley, a meeting in neutral territory to discuss possibilities. Isolde. Theron's voice was low with warning. I will be surrounded by guards. I will not actually negotiate anything. But if Varen believes I might be willing to consider his offer, he will focus his attention on me rather than on his prisoners. It will give you the opening you need. No. Theron shook his head. Too dangerous. If something goes wrong, I will handle it. She reached up to cup his face in her hands. I am not the helpless girl you found in the snow, Theron. You have trained me. Aldrich has trained me. And the moonborn power within me grows stronger every day. I can do this. I need to do this. The battle between love and logic played out across his features. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to lock her away somewhere safe until the danger had passed. But he had promised her partnership, equality. He could not break that promise now, no matter how much his wolf howled in protest. If anything happens to you, he began, then you will burn the world to get me back. She smiled, fierce and certain. I know, but nothing is going to happen. We are going to save those men, and then we are going to face whatever comes next. Together. Together! He pulled her against him, holding her as though she might disappear. In the shadows, Commander Draven made his decision. I will go with the rescue party. His voice cut through the moment, drawing every eye in the hall. My men are fresh, well-armed, and loyal. 5 warriors from Frostfall to supplement your 20. It might make the difference. Theron studied him with undisguised suspicion. Why would you risk your men for our cause? Because I have seen enough to know which side I should be on. Draven met the Alpha King's gaze without flinching. And because some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Theron nodded. We leave at midnight. Be ready. The raid was everything Theron had promised and more. 25 warriors moved through the mountain passes like ghosts, their steps silent on the frozen ground. Theron led from the front, his supernatural senses guiding them around patrols and past sentries that never knew they were there. Draven proved his worth within the first hour, his northern warriors as skilled at moving through hostile territory as any Ashford soldier. They reached Varen's encampment just before dawn, when the guards were tired and the prisoners would be most likely to cooperate quickly. The camp was larger than expected. Over 100 soldiers, with more arriving daily, as Varen gathered his forces for the coming conflict. But the prisoner tent was located on the eastern edge, away from the main body of troops. Theron's plan was simple, fast, violent when necessary. They struck like lightning. The first guards died without making a sound, their throats cut before they could raise an alarm. Theron himself took down 6 men in the time it took his warriors to handle 2. His centuries of combat experience showed in every movement, every strike, every kill executed with brutal efficiency. Inside the prisoner tent, they found the captured soldiers, beaten and starved but alive. Marcus, Aldrich's grandson, had to be carried by 2 men, his legs broken by Varen's torturers. But he was breathing. That was all that mattered. The escape was cleaner than Theron had dared hope. They were halfway to the mountain pass before the alarm finally sounded, too late to catch them in the open. Varen's soldiers gave pursuit, but the Ashford warriors knew these mountains like their own heartbeats. By the time the sun rose fully over the peaks, all 25 rescuers and all 24 prisoners were safely inside the castle walls. Aldrich met them in the courtyard, his weathered face wet with tears he did not bother to hide. Marcus. The word was a prayer as he gathered his broken grandson into his arms. My boy, my boy. Theron watched them, something ancient and heavy shifting in his chest. He thought of all the people he had lost over 3 centuries, all the family, all the friends, all the connections severed by time and violence. He thought of Alara, whose blood had stained Varen's message 300 years ago. And he thought of Isolde, who should have returned from her parley by now. He needed to find her, needed to hold her and confirm that she was safe, that Varen had not somehow managed to take her while he was fighting for his people's lives. But when he entered their chambers, they were empty. Isolde? His voice echoed off the stone walls. No answer. The bond between them pulsed with distance, with fear, with something that felt terrifyingly like farewell. No. Theron was moving before the thought fully formed, racing through the castle corridors toward the great hall. His wolf howled within him, sensing what his mind refused to accept. He burst through the doors to find chaos. Overturned chairs, shattered glass, the bodies of 4 guards who had clearly died fighting. And standing in the center of the destruction, a single figure in black armor with eyes that burned like hellfire. Lord Varen smiled at his former brother, and in that smile was 300 years of hatred given form. Theron. The name dripped from his lips like poison. You never could stay where you were supposed to be. Where is she? The words came out as barely human, a growl from the depths of Theron's wolf. Where is my mate? She is with me now, as she was always meant to be. Varen's smile widened. Did you really think I would let you have her? Another woman to replace my Alara? Another chance at happiness while I rot in darkness? His eyes blazed with madness. 300 years I have watched you, waited for you, planned for the moment when I could finally take everything from you as you took everything from me. I never took Alara from you. Theron's voice shook with rage. She chose me. That was never my doing. She was mine. The scream tore from Varen's throat like a physical blow. She was mine, and you stole her with your smiles and your honor and your precious noble heart. She was going to be my mate, my queen, my everything, and you took her from me. You killed her. The words fell like stones into still water. Whatever you have told yourself over these centuries, whatever lies you have wrapped around your broken mind, the truth remains. You murdered the woman we both loved because she dared to choose someone other than you. Varen's face twisted with something beyond madness. Then suddenly he laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the ruined hall. You think Alara was the first? You think she was the only woman who chose wrong? His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire chamber. Let me tell you about Lady Seraphina. Beautiful Seraphina, with her white blonde hair and violet eyes. She was going to be mine. 500 years ago, we were betrothed. Our families had agreed. Everything was perfect. Theron's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. And then your precious Isolde's father came along, a minor noble with nothing but charm and pretty words. Seraphina broke our betrothal for him. She chose him over me, just like Alara chose you. Isolde's mother. Theron breathed. Yes, Varen's smile was a wound. I watched Seraphina from afar for years. Watched her have children, watched her grow old, watched her die, knowing she had wasted her life on a man who could never appreciate her the way I would have. And then I learned she had a daughter with white blonde hair and violet eyes, just like her mother, a daughter who carried moonborn blood that Seraphina herself never knew she possessed. His eyes burned with obsession. When I heard about Isolde, I knew the moon goddess was giving me a second chance, a way to claim what should have been mine all along. Seraphina's daughter would become my bride, and I would finally have what I was denied. Before Theron could respond, before he could attack or plead or do anything at all, Varen dissolved into shadow and disappeared. The Alpha King of the Ashford dynasty stood alone in his ruined hall, surrounded by the bodies of men who had died trying to protect his queen. And for the first time in 300 years, he screamed. The sound that tore from his throat was not human. It was the howl of a wolf who had lost his mate, amplified by centuries of power and pain. The stones of the castle shook with its force. Windows shattered throughout the stronghold. Even the mountains themselves seemed to tremble. Aldrich found him there, still screaming, his claws extended and his eyes burning gold with the beast that threatened to consume him. Your Majesty. The general's voice was calm, despite the horror of what he had witnessed. Theron, you must control yourself. He took her. Theron's voice was barely recognizable. He took her, and I was not here to stop him. Then we will get her back. Commander Draven appeared in the doorway, his face grim but determined. We will gather every soldier, call every ally, and we will tear down whatever fortress he has hidden her in. You do not understand." Theron turned to face them, and in his eyes was despair that went beyond anything either man had ever seen. Varen spoke of a ritual to drain her power. If we do not reach her before the blood moon rises. He could not finish the sentence. He did not need to. General Aldrich straightened, reaching for the sword that had hung at his hip for 50 years. "Then we had better move quickly." He met his king's eyes with the steady gaze of a warrior who had faced death more times than he could count. "One more battle, Your Majesty. You promised me one more battle all those years ago. I am calling in that debt." Draven stepped forward, his northern warriors falling in behind him. Frostfall stands with Ashford. Whatever comes, we face it together. From the courtyard below, a new voice rose above the murmur of the gathered soldiers. "As do we." Theron moved to the window and looked down upon a sight that should have been impossible. Garrett, Isolde's brother, stood at the head of 200 men wearing the colors of her family house. His face was pale, his eyes haunted by revelations that had shattered everything he believed. "I know the truth now." Garrett's voice carried across the courtyard. "Varen showed us what he truly is when he took my sister. He never wanted to rescue her. He wanted to possess her, use her, destroy her." He drew his sword and raised it toward the window where Theron stood. "I was a fool, a pawn in his game, but I will not let my sister pay for my mistakes. Command us, Alpha King. Tell us where to find her, and we will follow you into hell itself." The gathered soldiers, Ashford and Frostfall, and now Isolde's own family guard, raised their voices in a roar of agreement. Theron looked at his allies. His enemies turned friends, his mentor who had never failed him. And somewhere in the distance, through the bond that still connected their souls, he felt Isolde's presence, weak, frightened, but alive. He held on to that feeling like a drowning man holds on to air. Varen's stronghold. His voice was steel and fire. "We march within the hour, and we do not stop until my queen is safe." The war for Isolde's soul had begun, and Theron Ashford, the cursed king, would burn the world to ashes before he let her fall into darkness. As the army assembled in the courtyard below, Theron stood alone in his chambers for one final moment. His gaze fell upon the bed they had shared, the sheets still carrying the faint scent of moonflowers that always clung to her skin. He pressed his hand against the pillow where her head had rested just that morning, when the world had still made sense, when hope had still seemed possible. The bond between them pulsed with her fear, her pain, her desperate love for him that even captivity could not dim. She was calling to him across the darkness, trusting that he would come, that he would find her, that he would save her as he had saved her from the snow all those weeks ago. "I am coming, my love." He whispered the words into the empty room. "Hold on, I am coming." He turned and strode from the chamber, his footsteps echoing through corridors that had stood for 1,000 years. Behind him, the castle that had been his prison and his sanctuary awaited the outcome of the battle to come. Before him, an army of warriors from 3 kingdoms stood ready to march into hell itself for a queen who had won their loyalty simply by being worthy of it. In the courtyard, Aldrich handed him his sword, the same blade that had tasted enemy blood on countless battlefields, the same blade that had failed to protect Alara 300 years ago. This time would be different. This time he would not be too late. "Move out!" The command was quiet, but it carried to every soldier in the assembled host. As one, they began their march toward Varen's stronghold, toward the final confrontation that would determine the fate of kingdoms. The moon rose above the mountains, silver and bright and watching. And somewhere in the darkness, Isolde felt her mate coming for her and allowed herself to hope. The dark citadel rose from the black mountains like a wound in the earth itself. Its towers clawed at the sky, twisted spires of obsidian stone that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. No flags flew from its battlements, no torches burned in its windows. The fortress existed in perpetual shadow, a monument to the darkness that had consumed its master 5 centuries ago. Even the clouds seemed to avoid passing over its peaks, as though the sky itself recoiled from the evil that dwelt within those ancient walls. And somewhere within those lightless halls, Isolde waited in chains. She had been conscious for 3 days now, though time had lost all meaning in the underground chamber where Varen kept her. There were no windows to mark the passage of sun and moon. No sounds from the outside world penetrated the thick stone walls. only the occasional drip of water from somewhere in the darkness, and the distant echo of footsteps that never quite reached her cell broke the oppressive silence. The chains that bound her wrists were made of blackened iron, inscribed with runes that pulsed with a sickly green light. Dark magic. The same corruption that Varen had used to curse Theron 300 years ago. The runes suppressed her moonborn power, keeping the silver light trapped beneath her skin like a fire smothered under wet blankets. Every time she reached for her gift, the chains tightened and the runes flared brighter, sending waves of pain through her arms. But they could not suppress the bond. Even now, even with miles of mountain and stone between them, Isolde could feel Theron. His rage burned like a distant sun, warming her despite the cold of her prison. His fear for her safety was a constant ache in her chest, a mirror of her own terror that she refused to let overwhelm her. And his determination, his absolute refusal to let her go, gave her the strength to keep her own fear at bay. She was not helpless, she was not broken, she was waiting, and she was learning. In the 3 days of her captivity, Isolde had studied everything she could see of her prison. The placement of the torches, the pattern of the guard rotations, the subtle imperfections in the suppression runes where age and carelessness had weakened their power. She memorized the layout of the corridors she glimpsed when guards moved her between chambers. She listened to conversations that the guards assumed she could not hear. Information was power, and power was what she needed. Varen visited her on the second day. He entered the chamber without ceremony, his dark robes sweeping across the damp stone floor like the wings of some enormous carrion bird. In the dim light of the suppression runes, his face looked almost skeletal, the madness in his eyes burning brighter than any torch. He had been handsome once, she realized, centuries ago, before jealousy and hatred had twisted him into this hollow shell of a man. "You are stronger than I expected." His voice echoed off the walls as he circled her slowly, studying her like a specimen in a collection. "Most prisoners beg by now. They weep. They make promises they cannot keep. But you simply sit there, watching me with those strange violet eyes, as though you are the one in control." "I am not most prisoners." Isolde kept her voice steady, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "And you are not as frightening as you believe yourself to be." Varen laughed, a cold sound that held no warmth or humor. It was the laugh of someone who had forgotten what genuine amusement felt like. "Brave words from a woman in chains. But we shall see how brave you remain when I show you what I have planned." He waved his hand, and the air before her shimmered like heat rising from summer stone. Images formed in the distortion, memories pulled from somewhere beyond time and space. The magic was dark and invasive, forcing visions into her mind whether she wanted them or not. Isolde saw a woman with dark hair and fierce eyes, dressed in warrior's armor that gleamed in firelight. She was beautiful in a wild, untamed way, her smile carrying the promise of both passion and danger. The woman moved through the vision with the grace of someone trained in combat, her every step confident and sure. "Elara." Varen's voice had changed, growing softer with something that might have been genuine grief. "The only woman I ever truly loved. She was magnificent, was she not? A warrior queen who could have ruled kingdoms at my side. We would have been unstoppable together. I would have given her everything, every conquest, every treasure, every drop of blood in my veins." He paused and his voice hardened again. "But she chose him. She chose Theron, just like your mother chose your father. Just like every woman I have ever wanted has chosen someone other than me." The images shifted, showing Elara and a younger Theron standing together, their hands intertwined, their eyes holding the same love that Isolde recognized from her own bond. They looked happy in a way that seemed to radiate from the vision itself, two souls who had found their perfect match. Then darkness descended, and Isolde saw what Varen wanted her to see: the murder. She watched Elara sleep peacefully in a bed of silk and furs, her face relaxed in dreams of a future she would never see. She watched Varen creep through the shadows with a blade in his hand, his footsteps silent on the cold stone floor. She watched him lean over the sleeping woman, his face twisted with jealousy and rage that had festered for years. And she watched him cut Elara's throat while she dreamed of her wedding day. Isolde turned her face away, bile rising in her throat. The vision was too real, too immediate. She could almost smell the blood, almost hear the gurgling gasp that had been Elara's final breath. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to understand. Varen dismissed the images with another wave of his hand. "I want you to understand that Theron has always taken what should have been mine. Alara, power, respect. For 300 years, I have watched him thrive while I rotted in exile, building my strength, biding my time, but that ends now." He leaned close, his breath cold against her face. His eyes were empty pits of darkness, reflecting nothing but the sickly green glow of the suppression runes. "In 3 days, when the blood moon rises, I will use your moonborn power to complete a ritual that will make me truly immortal. Not the false immortality of the werewolf curse, not the borrowed centuries that can be ended by blade or fire, but genuine, absolute immortality. Nothing will be able to kill me. Not Theron, not armies, not the moon goddess herself. And then I will destroy everything Theron has ever built. His kingdom, his people, his legacy. I will burn it all to ash and make him watch. And when there is nothing left, when he has lost everything he loves, when he is as broken and hollow as he made me, I will finally kill him. Slowly, painfully, the way he has been killing me for 300 years. Varen straightened, his lips curving into a smile that held no sanity. "You should be honored, little Moonborn. Your death will fuel the end of an era." He left her alone in the darkness, but Isolde was already working. The suppression runes were strong, but they were not absolute. Varen had designed them to contain Moonborn power, to prevent her from using her gifts to escape or fight. But he had not considered the mate bond, that ancient connection that transcended simple magic. The bond was older than his runes, older than his dark magic, older perhaps than Varen himself. Isolde closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, past the chains and the runes and the walls of dark magic. She found the thread of gold that connected her to Theron, thin as spider silk, but stronger than any chain Varen could forge. The bond pulsed with warmth despite the cold of her prison, a constant reminder that she was not alone. She could not send words through the bond. The distance was too great, the interference too strong. But she could send feelings, impressions, the shape of an idea without the specifics. It was like trying to have a conversation through a wall, but she had learned to make it work. She sent him everything she had learned in her 3 days of captivity. The layout of the fortress, memorized from the glimpses she had stolen when guards moved her between chambers. The position of the main hall, where Varen spent most of his time preparing for the ritual. The weakness in the eastern wall, where centuries of neglect had caused the stone to crumble. The rotation patterns of the guards. The location of the ritual chamber deep beneath the citadel. And most importantly, the truth she had discovered in Varen's memories of Alara. There was only one way to destroy him permanently. A moonborn sacrifice. The silver light within her, released all at once in a burst of purifying radiance, could burn away the darkness that had consumed Varen's soul. It could destroy the dark magic that protected him, that had cursed Theron, that threatened to consume the world. The Moonborn's gift was not just power. It was purity itself, the antithesis of everything Varen had become. But the cost would be everything. Isolde knew this. She had seen it in the ancient texts that Varen kept in his study, the ones he believed she could not read. She understood that unleashing her full power would consume her from within, burning away her physical form like a candle flame consuming its own wax. The texts were clear on this point. No Moonborn had ever survived releasing their full potential. She would die, but Theron would live. The curse would be broken. Varen would finally face justice for 300 years of evil. And the darkness that threatened the 5 kingdoms would be purged forever. It was not even a choice. She sent one final message through the bond, putting every ounce of love and certainty she possessed into the feeling. "I found a way, but you will not like it." Miles away, in the war camp that had sprung up at the base of the Black Mountains, Theron received the message like a blade through his heart. He knew immediately what she meant. He had read the same ancient texts during his long centuries of research into the curse. He knew what a Moonborn sacrifice entailed, knew that the power she carried could destroy any darkness, but would consume its vessel in the process. The texts had been clear, clinical in their description of what would happen. No. The word tore from his throat with such force that the commanders around him fell silent. Maps scattered from the table before him, candles flickered in the sudden wind of his fury. Absolutely not. General Aldrich stepped forward, his weathered face drawn with exhaustion from the forced march to reach the citadel. The old warrior had pushed himself beyond reasonable limits, refusing to rest while his king's mate remained in enemy hands. "Your Majesty, what has happened?" "She has found a way to kill Varen." Theron's hands shook as he gripped the table before him, his claws leaving deep gouges in the wood. "A permanent solution, but it requires her death." Silence fell over this command tent. The weight of those words pressed down on everyone present, the terrible mathematics of war asserting itself once again. One life against thousands, one sacrifice against victory. The equation was simple, the answer obvious to anyone with military training. But this was not just anyone. Commander Draven spoke first, his voice carefully neutral. "If there is no other way, there is always another way." Theron's copper eyes blazed with fury. "I did not wait centuries to find my mate, only to watch her die for me. I did not endure all that loneliness and despair to lose her now. There will be another solution, or I will create one myself." Garrett, Isolde's brother, stepped forward. The man who had once marched against Theron now stood as his ally, driven by guilt and the desperate need to save the sister he had failed for 18 years. His face was drawn with exhaustion and worry, but his voice was steady. "What if she did not have to do it alone?" "What do you mean?" "The mate bond." Garrett's voice gained strength as the idea took shape. "It connects you, does it not? Allows you to share emotions, sensations, even power?" "Yes." "Then what if you shared the burden of the sacrifice? What if instead of one person bearing the full weight of the Moonborn's light, two people divided it between them?" Aldrich's eyes widened. "The boy has a point. The ancient texts speak of sacrifice, but they never specify that it must be a single sacrifice. If the bond between you is strong enough, if you could somehow reach her at the moment she releases her power—" "We do not know if it would work," Draven interjected. "You would be risking your life on a theory. I am already risking everything." Theron straightened, decision crystallizing in his copper eyes. "If there is even a chance that I could save her by sharing the burden, I will take it. And if we both die in the attempt, at least we will die together." He turned to face his commanders, his generals, and the assembled leaders of the alliance that had formed around him. These men had followed him through impossible odds. They had trusted his judgment through 3 centuries of war. Now he asked them to trust him once more. "This is my plan. We assault the Dark Citadel with everything we have, create chaos, draw Varen's attention outward. While his forces are occupied with the battle, I will infiltrate the fortress and find Isolde before the ritual can be completed." "And if Varen finds you first?" Aldrich asked. "Then I will kill him myself or die trying." The old general studied his king for a long moment, seeing not the immortal ruler who had led armies for 3 centuries, but the young prince he had trained so long ago, the boy who had lost his father too young, the man who had lost his first love to betrayal, and now the king who refused to lose again. "Then I am coming with you." Aldrich drew his sword, holding it before him in the ancient gesture of fealty. "One more battle, Your Majesty. You promised me one more battle. I intend to see it through. Your age will hold long enough to see this finished." The general's weathered face was set with determination. "I have lived 70 years, Theron. I have seen more battles than I can count. If this is to be my last, I can think of no better cause than fighting beside the king I raised." One by one, the other commanders stepped forward. Draven drew his blade and added his oath. Garrett, despite his lack of military experience, pledged his sword and his life. Even the representatives from the allied kingdoms, men who had only recently become friends rather than enemies, offered their support. By the time dawn broke over the Black Mountains, an army of 80,000 stood ready to storm the Dark Citadel. And at their head, the Alpha King prepared to fight for everything that mattered. The assault began at noon, when the winter sun hung at its highest point in the pale sky. Theron had chosen the timing deliberately. Varen's power was strongest in darkness, weakened by direct sunlight. Even the feeble rays of a winter noon would sap his strength, give the Allied forces whatever advantage they could find against the dark magic that protected the citadel. The first wave struck the main gates with siege engines and battering rams, the thunder of their impact echoing across the mountains like the drums of war. Varen's forces responded with arrows and dark fire, raining death upon the attackers from the high walls. Men fell screaming, their bodies consumed by green flames that could not be extinguished. But the alliance did not falter. Garrett led the assault on the eastern flank, his men pouring through the weakness in the wall that Isolde had identified. They fought like demons possessed, driven by Garrett's desperate need to redeem himself for years of neglect and cruelty toward his sister. He was first through the breach, his sword cutting down enemy soldiers who had expected an easy defense. Draven commanded the southern approach, his northern warriors employing tactics that Varen had never encountered. They struck in waves, retreating before the enemy could respond, then returning from unexpected angles to exploit momentary weaknesses. It was like fighting smoke, the defenders complained. The Northerners were there one moment and gone the next. And at the center, Aldrich led the main assault, drawing the bulk of Varen's attention, while Theron slipped through the chaos toward the fortress itself. The old general stood at the front of his men, his white hair visible above the carnage like a beacon of defiance. He fought with the skill of 70 years of practice, every strike precise, every movement economical. The Alpha King moved through the battle like a force of nature. His sword cut through enemy soldiers without slowing. His wolf strength allowed him to leap obstacles that would have stopped ordinary men. His centuries of combat experience guided him around traps and ambushes that would have killed lesser warriors. But even his supernatural abilities could not get him through the Citadel's inner defenses alone. He found the entrance to the underground chambers, guarded by a dozen of Varen's elite soldiers, men who had been twisted by dark magic into something barely human. Their eyes glowed with the same green light as the suppression runes, their movements jerky and unnatural. They did not speak, did not retreat, did not show any sign of fear or hesitation. Theron did not hesitate either. He threw himself into their midst, his blade singing through the corrupted flesh of his enemies. They fell like wheat before a scythe, but more emerged from the shadows to replace them. For every one he killed, two more appeared, an endless tide of darkness that threatened to overwhelm even his immortal strength. Then Aldrich was beside him. The old general moved with surprising speed for a man of 70, his blade finding gaps in enemy defenses that younger warriors would have missed. Years of experience had honed his instincts to razor sharpness, allowing him to fight not with strength, but with precision. Where Theron was a hurricane of destruction, Aldrich was a scalpel, cutting through the enemy with surgical accuracy. "Go," Aldrich shouted over the clash of steel. "Find her. I will hold them here. I will not leave you. You do not have a choice." The general knocked aside an enemy blade and drove his sword through the attacker's throat. "The ritual begins at moonrise. If you do not reach her before then, none of this matters. Go, Theron, save your mate. That is an order." For a frozen moment, the Alpha King and his mentor locked eyes. 300 years of history passed between them in that single glance. Training sessions that had shaped a wild prince into a disciplined warrior. Counsel that had guided a young king through impossible decisions. Friendship that had endured longer than most men lived. "I will see you again, old friend." Theron's voice was rough with emotion. "Of that I have no doubt." Aldrich smiled, the expression transforming his battle-worn face. "Now go, and give Varen my regards." Theron went. He descended into the darkness of the Citadel's depths, following the pull of the mate bond that grew stronger with every step. The suppression runes tried to obscure Isolde's location, but they could not completely sever the connection that bound their souls. She was close, she was alive, and she was running out of time. He found her in the ritual chamber, a vast cavern that had been carved from the living rock of the mountain itself. Torches of green fire lined the walls, casting sickly shadows across the runes that covered every surface. In the center of the chamber, a massive altar of black stone stood beneath a shaft of natural light that descended from somewhere far above. Isolde was chained to the altar, her white blonde hair spread around her like a halo, her violet eyes closed in concentration. The suppression runes on her chains pulsed with increasing intensity, fighting against something that strained to break free. Even from across the chamber, Theron could feel the power building within her. And standing before the altar, his arms raised toward the shaft of light that was beginning to turn blood red with the rising moon, was Lord Varen. "You are too late, brother." Varen did not turn to face him, but his voice echoed through the chamber with absolute confidence. "The ritual has already begun. In moments her power will be mine, and not even the moon goddess will be able to stop me." "Then I will stop you myself." Theron strode forward, his sword raised, every muscle tensed for combat. Varen finally turned, and Theron saw that the dark magic had transformed him. His eyes had become pits of absolute blackness, no whites or irises remaining. Dark veins crawled beneath his pale skin, pulsing with power stolen from sources too terrible to name. He looked less like a man now, and more like a vessel for something ancient and hungry. You still do not understand, do you? Varen's voice had gained an otherworldly resonance. This was always going to end this way. From the moment you were born, from the moment the moon goddess chose your bloodline over mine, we were destined for this confrontation. You took everything from me. Alara, power, the life I should have lived, and now I will take everything from you. You took Alara from yourself when you murdered her. Theron's voice was steady despite the rage that burned in his chest. You destroyed your own chance at happiness because you could not accept that she had the right to choose, just as Seraphina had the right to choose, just as Isolde has the right to choose. He stopped 10 paces from the altar, his copper eyes finding Isolde's violet ones across the distance. And she chose me. Despite everything you have done, despite every manipulation and every curse, she chose me. That is what you cannot accept. That is what drives you mad. Not that I took something from you, but that it was never yours to take. Varen's face twisted with fury. Pretty words from a dead man. He attacked. The battle that followed was unlike anything Theron had experienced in 300 years of warfare. Varen moved with supernatural speed, his dark magic augmenting his physical abilities far beyond any natural limit. Blasts of green fire erupted from his hands. Shadows reached up from the floor to grasp at Theron's legs. The very air seemed to thicken around the Alpha King, trying to crush him with invisible force. But Theron had spent 3 centuries preparing for this moment. He dodged the fire and cut through the shadows. He pushed through the crushing pressure by sheer force of will. His blade found Varen's flesh again and again, drawing blood that steamed and smoked where it struck the stone floor. Each wound healed almost instantly, but each strike weakened the dark magic that protected his enemy. They fought across the ritual chamber, their combat a dance of death that destroyed everything it touched. Torches shattered, runes cracked and splintered. The very walls shook with the force of their battle. 300 years of hatred and betrayal poured out in every swing, every parry, every desperate strike. Above them, the moonlight continued its transformation, growing redder with each passing moment. The ritual progressed despite their fight, feeding on the ambient magic that filled the chamber. Time was running out. On the altar, Isolde had opened her eyes. She watched her mate fight for her life, saw the strength and courage that had made her love him despite everything. She felt the bond between them burning brighter than ever, a connection that transcended the chains and the runes and the dark magic that surrounded them. And she knew what she had to do. The suppression runes were strong, but they were not unbreakable. Isolde had spent 3 days studying them, learning their patterns, finding the tiny flaws in their construction. Now she poured her will against those flaws, pushing against the chains with every ounce of moonborn power she possessed. Silver light began to leak through the cracks. Varen sensed it immediately. No! He broke away from Theron, spinning toward the altar with terror in his black eyes. Stop, you will kill yourself. Yes. Isolde's voice was calm as the silver light grew brighter. I will, but I will take you with me. The suppression runes shattered. Power exploded from Isolde's body, a wave of silver radiance that filled the chamber with the light of 1,000 moons. Varen screamed as the light touched him, his dark magic burning away like morning mist before the sun. His flesh began to smoke and char, the corruption that had sustained him for 5 centuries being purged by the purity of the Moonborn's gift. But the light was also consuming Isolde. Theron saw her begin to fade, her physical form becoming translucent as the power poured out of her without restraint. The sacrifice the ancient texts described was happening before his eyes. She was giving everything she had to destroy Varen, and in moments there would be nothing left of her but memory. He did not hesitate. The Alpha King threw himself across the chamber, ignoring the burning light that seared his skin. He reached the altar and grasped Isolde's hands, pouring his own strength into the bond that connected them. Together. His voice was a roar that echoed above the chaos. We face this together. Power flowed between them like lightning between clouds. Theron's wolf strength merged with Isolde's moonborn light, creating something new, something that had never existed before. The burden of the sacrifice, meant to consume a single soul, was divided between 2. And in that moment of perfect unity, the moon goddess appeared. She manifested as a figure of pure silver light, beautiful beyond mortal comprehension. Her voice was the sound of stars singing, of tides responding to lunar pull, of wolves howling at the midnight sky. 300 years I have waited for this moment. Her words filled the chamber, silencing even Varen's screams. I cursed Theron Ashford not as punishment, but as a test. I needed to know if he was worthy of the Moonborn's power, if he could find love despite centuries of isolation, if he could choose sacrifice over survival. The goddess turned her gaze upon the two figures still joined at the altar. But I never expected this. Two souls so perfectly matched that they would choose to die together rather than let the other sacrifice alone. This is the true bond. This is the love that transcends death and magic, and even my own divine will. She raised her hand, and the silver light changed. Instead of consuming them, it wrapped around Theron and Isolde like a cocoon, protecting them from the burning intensity of the Moonborn's power. The burden of the sacrifice was lifted from their shoulders, taken by a force greater than either of them could comprehend. The curse is broken, the goddess declared. The Moonborn lives, and the darkness that called itself Varen is no more. Behind them, Lord Varen had ceased to exist. The purifying light had burned through his corruption completely, leaving nothing behind but a scorch mark on the stone floor. 500 years of hatred and jealousy and murder ended in a single moment of divine intervention. The moon goddess smiled, an expression of infinite warmth and compassion. Go now, my children. Live the life you have earned. Love each other with the devotion you have proven. And know that when your time finally comes, centuries from now, I will be waiting to welcome you home. She faded like moonlight at dawn, leaving Theron and Isolde alone in the silent chamber. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The magnitude of what had just happened, the miracle of their survival, was too vast to process. They simply held each other, feeling the bond between them burning brighter than ever before. Then Isolde laughed. It was a sound of pure joy, of relief and wonder and love that could not be contained. Theron joined her, his deep laughter mixing with hers in the echoing chamber. They laughed until tears streamed down their faces, until their bodies shook with the release of tension that had built over weeks and months and centuries. We did it, Isolde whispered when she could finally speak. We survived. We did more than survive. Theron cupped her face in his hands, his copper eyes shining with emotion. We won. He kissed her then, pouring 300 years of loneliness and a lifetime of love into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the first rays of true sunlight were beginning to filter through the shaft above the altar. The blood moon had passed, a new dawn was beginning. The battle outside had ended. With Varen's death, the dark magic that had sustained his fortress and his soldiers collapsed. The twisted warriors fell like puppets with their strings cut. The walls that had withstood sieges for centuries crumbled into ruin. The shadows that had shrouded the citadel retreated before the morning sun. Theron and Isolde emerged from the ruins to find their allies victorious. General Aldrich stood among the survivors, his armor dented and his sword arm bloodied from the fierce fighting at the underground entrance. He had held the position against overwhelming odds, refusing to fall despite the endless waves of twisted soldiers that had tried to break through. When he saw his king and queen walking toward him, hand in hand, he smiled with a joy that erased decades from his weathered face. I knew you would make it. His voice cracked with emotion. I never doubted for a moment. Garrett had survived as well, though he would carry scars from the battle for the rest of his life. He fell to his knees before Isolde, tears streaming down his face. I am sorry. The words seemed inadequate for 18 years of neglect and cruelty. I am so sorry for everything. Isolde pulled him to her feet and embraced him, the sister forgiving the brother who had failed her for so long. We cannot change the past, but we can build a better future, together, as the family we should always have been. Commander Draven approached with a report of the Allied casualties. The losses had been significant, but far fewer than expected, given the strength of Varen's defenses. The combined tactics of three kingdoms, working together rather than against each other, had proven devastatingly effective. This could be the beginning of something remarkable, Draven observed as they surveyed the ruined fortress. 4 kingdoms united by a common cause. Think of what we could accomplish if we maintained this alliance in peacetime. Theron considered this commander's words, seeing the wisdom in them. For 500 years, the kingdoms had fought among themselves, wasting lives and resources on conflicts that served no one. Perhaps it was time for a new era. Arrange a summit. The Alpha King decided. Representatives from all kingdoms, meeting on neutral ground to discuss permanent alliance. If we can fight together, we can prosper together. The months that followed were a time of healing and rebuilding. The dark citadel was demolished completely, its stones scattered across the mountains so that no trace of Varen's evil would remain. The curse that had hung over Theron for 3 centuries was confirmed to be broken, his wolf at peace for the first time since that terrible night when Alara died. Aldrich recovered from his battle wound slowly, his aged body requiring more time to heal than it once had. He finally accepted that his days of active combat were behind him. He retired to a comfortable position as the royal advisor, still offering counsel to his king, but no longer leading men into battle. He spent his remaining years training the next generation of warriors, passing on the wisdom that had served Theron so well. Garrett returned to his family's lands, but he was a changed man. He dismantled the tower where Isolde had been imprisoned, converting the stones into a monument to those who had suffered from prejudice and cruelty. He became an advocate for Omega rights, using his noble status to push for reforms that would ensure no child ever experienced what his sister had endured. Draven returned to the Northern Kingdom with treaties that would reshape the political landscape of the realm. The alliance that had been forged in battle became a permanent institution, with regular summits and shared trade agreements that benefited all members. War, while never completely eliminated, became rare enough that an entire generation grew up without experiencing it. And at the heart of it all, Theron and Isolde ruled together. Their bond, strengthened by the sacrifice they had been willing to make for each other, became legendary. They governed with wisdom and compassion, balancing strength with mercy in ways that earned them the love of their people. The Ashford dynasty entered a golden age that would be remembered for centuries. 6 months after the final battle, Isolde discovered she was carrying their first child. Theron received the news with a joy that brought him to his knees. For 300 years, he had believed he would never have a family, never continue his bloodline, never experience the simple miracle of holding his own child. Now, with Isolde's hand pressed against her growing belly, he understood that all the pain and loneliness had been worth enduring. This was his reward. This was his legacy. This was everything he had been waiting for. The formal coronation of Queen Isolde took place on the anniversary of their binding ceremony. She stood beside Theron in the great hall of the Ashford stronghold, dressed in silver and white, her moonborn heritage proclaimed openly rather than hidden in shame. The gathered nobles from all 4 allied kingdoms witnessed their vows renewed, their partnership affirmed before gods and mortals alike, and when General Aldrich placed the crown upon her white blonde hair, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers that could be heard throughout the mountains. That night, as they stood together on the balcony overlooking their kingdom, Theron pulled his wife close and rested his hand upon the swell of her belly where their child grew. 300 years I waited for you. His voice was rough with emotion. 300 years of darkness and loneliness and despair. And I would wait 300 more if that was what finding you required. Isolde leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong against her spine. I spent 18 years believing I was worthless, that my appearance was a curse, that I would never be loved or valued by anyone. And then you found me in the snow and showed me how wrong I was. She turned in his arms, looking up at him with violet eyes that still took his breath away. You did not just save my life that night, Theron. You gave me a reason to live it. They kissed beneath the stars, their bond singing with happiness and promise. And somewhere above them, the moon goddess smiled. 100 years later, the story had become legend. Children throughout the 5 kingdoms grew up hearing tales of the cursed king and the moonborn bride. They learned of the 300 years of waiting, the sacrifice that defeated evil, the love that transcended death itself. The story was told around hearth fires and in palace nurseries, inspiring new generations with its message of hope and devotion. In the great hall of the Ashford stronghold, a portrait hung in a place of honor. It showed a man with copper eyes and a woman with white blonde hair, their hands intertwined, their expressions carrying the weight of everything they had endured and the joy of everything they had achieved together. And in the private quarters of the Alpha King and Queen, Theron sat with his youngest great-grandchild upon his knee, telling the story once more. But grandfather, the child interrupted, her own violet eyes wide with wonder. How did you know grandmother was worth waiting for? How did you know she was the one? Theron smiled, his copper eyes finding Isolde across the room, where she sat reading to their other grandchildren. Even after a century together, the sight of her still made his heart race. I did not know at first, he admitted. When I found her in the snow, all I knew was that the bond had finally awakened. But over time, I learned who she truly was, her courage, her kindness, her strength. And I realized that the moon goddess had chosen better for me than I ever could have chosen for myself. The child considered this seriously. Would you really have waited another 300 years? Theron looked at his mate, remembering everything they had shared, the darkness and the light, the battles and the peace, the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. I would have waited forever. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. Isolde looked up from her reading, meeting his gaze across the room. The bond between them hummed with love and contentment, as strong now as it had been on the day of their binding ceremony. She smiled, and the years fell away. For a moment, they were not the ancient rulers of a vast kingdom. They were simply two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and refused to let go. Forever, Theron mouthed silently. Forever, she mouthed back. And in the warmth of their family, surrounded by the legacy they had built together, the cursed king and the moonborn bride proved that some loves truly do last for eternity. The end.